Now, I don't know about you, but I'm getting a little tired of all this talk about a housing crash. It seems like everybody's got an opinion and everybody is so pessimistic. Why is it that when things start going good, we immediately start looking for the reasons why it can't last? Do you remember the economy before the pandemic? It was 128 months, 10 and a half years of sustained economic expansion. How many gurus were out there during that entire 10 and a half years proclaiming that right around the corner we were going to see a crash? But how many of them actually forecasted that the entire thing would come to a halt because of a virus that shut down economic activity all across the globe? And now we're not even fully out of the pandemic yet, and they're already starting about another crash is coming. Here's a thought for you. Who cares if the real estate market crashes? I mean, seriously, what difference would it make to you if the real estate market crashed today? Stick around for this video, and I'll show you that even if all this hype about an imminent housing market crash here in Austin was true, it probably wouldn't matter much at all. First of all, let's talk about what a crash actually is. In order to have a crash, you first have to have a bubble. And that's when real estate prices increase rapidly until we reach, quote, unsustainable levels. At those unsustainable levels, there will be less buyers. So if there are less buyers able to afford the higher prices, more and more houses will remain unsold. And as the number of available houses increases, prices will eventually begin to decline to attract more buyers. Now in the stock market, these boom and bust cycles happen quickly. Do you remember March 2020 when the coronavirus panic began to take hold? Selling on the stock market increased so rapidly that they actually had to pause trading a number of times. Now the real estate market is not as liquid as equities. If you want to sell stock, you log into your account, click the button, and boom, it's sold. If you wanted to sell your house though, it could take 1, 2, 3, or even more months before that transaction was actually finalized. It's also important to remember that the real estate market is very geographic specific. What's going on in Wyoming is very different than what's going on in California or what's going on in Texas. And even within the state of Texas, the Houston market is very different than the Austin market. And within each metro area, you're going to see differences. What's going on in BK versus what's going on in Buda, versus what's going on in Round Rock versus North Austin versus East Austin. And regardless of whether or not you think we're in a bubble or whether or not you think a crash is coming, you will not realize that loss or gain until you sell the asset. In other words, if you owned a house and the Austin housing market crashed, what would happen? Absolutely nothing. You would continue to pay your mortgage, you would continue to send your kids to school, and you continue to live your life. Whatever the market value is for your house is irrelevant until you want to sell the house. Now, if you're thinking about selling, we are still in a seller's market, but you may have missed your window to get crazy money. You may have heard some of the stories from earlier this year when a house got between 20 and 50 offers, all of them over list price. Now, my research suggests that of all the houses that sold, about 10% of them sold for substantially more than that list price. The crazy money. I'm talking a $400,000 house selling for $600,000. Now, don't get me wrong. It's still competitive. There are still multiple offers, and houses are still selling for more than the list price. But the crazy money is not nearly as common as it was back in February and March of this year. But coming back to our topic of what happens if the housing market crashes. If you bought your house 10 years ago, you would likely not get as much as you could have back in February or March. And if the housing market crashed, it would probably be even less. But it would still be more than what you paid 10 years ago. Now, if you bought your house in the last 6 months, especially if you paid over the list price, if the housing market crashed today, you might not be able to get as much as you paid for it. But if you stayed in that house for 20 years, it's really not going to make any difference whatsoever. Whatever might happen in the next 6 to 18 months is really going to be a small blip on that graph when you extrapolate it over 2 decades or even more. But what if you're a buyer? If you haven't bought yet, you may find yourself priced out of the exact same areas you were looking just 6 or 9 months ago. It really wasn't that long ago when you could buy a house in some of the northern suburbs, Leander, Liberty Hill, Hutto, Manor. You could buy a house for less than $300,000. In fact, some of the builders there still have those starting at prices on their signs. In today's market though, in those exact same neighborhoods, you'll see prices of $400,000, $500,000, and $600,000. If your approval is for $400,000, you're not going to be able to buy a $600,000 house unless you have a couple $100,000 to use as a down payment. But if you had that, you probably would have already bought a house, right? Of everybody out there, you're the one praying for a crash. But unfortunately, wishful thinking does not drive the housing market. Coming back to the topic of this video, if the housing market crashed today, you would benefit from the lower prices. But you would need to take action. But remember, you haven't taken action in the last 6 months because of the market uncertainty. But what do you think you're going to do if prices begin to fall and there's even more uncertainty than there is now? The best advice I can give you is that buying a house is not like day trading. If you think you're going to time the market and buy at exactly the right time, I suggest you remember this old saying. The absolute best time to buy real estate is always 10 years ago. But the second best time is right now. You will not see the tax benefits, the appreciation, or the equity until you buy a house. And if you can't afford your dream house now, why don't you do what everybody else does? Buy a starter home, build some equity, and buy your dream house in 5 or 10 years. If you like this video, you should check out the one I did on the Austin housing boom. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell. All of my contact information is in the video description, so don't be shy. Let's make your real estate dreams come true.